Thanks everyone for joining this session. Um, so my name is Daniel Strmečki, and I work at a company called XIO, which is a part of IBM iX Group. And I will do this talk for you live today from a small town in the north of Croatia called Varaždin. The topic that I want to present and share with you today is behavior versus implementation testing in AEM. So let's get started. In the intro section of the presentation, I would like to answer these 4 questions around testing, and that is how we test, why do we even test, when we test, and most importantly, what do we need to test? So let's get started with the first question, and the first question is how to test. And this question I won't be spending too much time on because I believe this question has already been answered in a lot of books, but also there has been several talks here in adaptTo how to do testing in AEM. We have 3, I would say, quite mature tools that we use nowadays. So we have JUnit version 5, we have Mockito, and thankfully we also have AEM Mocks, which make our life a lot more easier. So in this session, I won't talk about any tools or libraries. Instead, this session will have the focus on what our testing strategy should look like. The second question that I raised in the intro is why do we even test stuff? And I also believe there's been several talks already around this topic. And I think we have a consensus in the community that writing tests does make sense. It does take also our time, but in the long run, it makes us faster, and it also improves the quality, design, and maybe most importantly, the maintainability of our projects and our solutions. The third question is, when do we need to test? When is a good time to write any kind of a test in AEM, Java, or whatever kind of project? And the answer here is pretty simple, and that is whenever you write some business logic, that is a great time to write a test for it. Maybe a different scenario would be that whenever you write, any kind of code, you write your test, and maybe you write your test just to achieve some high code coverage that someone has set up as a rule for you. I don't think this is a good approach because of the reason that if you just you just aim to have a high code coverage without thinking too much what you actually want to test, you will end up with a code base that is brittle, which means it's easy to break. It's hard to read for everyone else, and it doesn't really support easy refactoring, which is one of the goals of the testing. And why doesn't it support easy refactoring? Because if you mock every implementation that you write, then basically you end up with 2 different implementations that you need to maintain: the real implementation and the mock implementation. And if you have these 2 implementations, then in case you need to refactor anything, you need to refactor it at both places, the implementation and the mock. So the question that we are going to focus in today's lecture is actually this last one. And that is, what do we want to test? I believe this is the core of a testing strategy that basically every company should have, and usually it's in the forms of guidelines on what is to be tested on projects that we do. So I will start with some basics that I believe should be a part of mostly any testing strategy. And the first basic guideline would be to test requirements. What I mean by requirements is that when you write a test, you focus on behavior or the functionality that you are developing over the way how you implemented it, and that is your implementation details. The second core guideline I would like to mention here is to actually test the business logic that you write. Because nowadays we use a lot of frameworks. One of them is AEM. We use a lot of libraries in our projects, and sometimes we tend to test the framework or the library functionality. And this is not something we should do. We should always focus our testing on the business logic that we write, because if we work in AEM, then Adobe developers developing AEM are in charge of testing AEM functionality. So it shouldn't be something that we are doing. And last core guideline I would like to mention here is that we focus our testing on the APIs that we expose and not the internal details. Because if we start, writing tests this way, that we test the things that we are expecting to get out of the system, or the things that we expose to the end users and to different systems, then this will actually enable us easy refactoring, because we are not tying up our internal implementation with the tests and the end results that we want to achieve with those tests. So that was the intro section, and now in the second section of the presentation, I would like to talk about unit versus integration testing, and I will also like to then deep dive into some specifics around AEM. But let's start with very, very general basic difference of these two types of testing. I'm pretty sure most of you know this, but let's just define what is a unit and an integration test. So a unit test is a test written by a developer to test a single unit of code. This is usually either a method or a class, and in AEM it could be usually a service or a model. Integration test is a different kind of test, because in integration testing we try to focus on the functionality, on the requirement, and we check if different of these units, so this can be like components, services, or modules, are they working well together towards achieving our common goal, which is usually a business requirement. So if you're a developer and you're developing a certain feature, you need to decide how you want to test it. Do you write a unit test for it? Do you write an integration test for it? Or do you write both? And I don't think there is like a golden rule, but I also here have a guideline, and that is to prefer integration testing when you can. And I will try to explain why I tend to follow this. Because integration tests by definition focus on behavior and requirements, and not the internal implementation details. Second thing really important to mention here is that mocking is very hard. If you ever needed to mock a lot of things, then it's very hard to write mocking code, and it's even harder to maintain it. And third fact I would like to mention here is that with integration testing, it takes less time to achieve the same code coverage that you would need if you would use unit tests. And lastly, I want to say here that I'm not saying or implying that unit tests are not welcome and that you shouldn't write unit tests anymore. I'm saying prefer integration testing when you can. But of course, unit tests are still welcome, because sometimes you need unit tests to test some complicated business logic. If you have something specific, for example, an OSGI service that's very complicated, then of course that's a good use case to write a unit test. So that was a bit of general talk around unit and integration tests, and let's now dig into what's really specific in AEM. And I want to start with one topic specific to AEM, integration testing, because when you say integration testing in front of a different audience, they might think different things. In AEM integration, when you say integration tests, people usually mean the integration tests. You generate a new AEM project using the archetype, and you will get this integration test module. And those are integration tests as recommended by Adobe that run on running instances. What I want to show you in this presentation, that there is another way to write integration tests, because I believe that the tools that we have, including JUnit, Mockito, and AEM Mocks, are mature enough libraries that we can use them for writing both integration and unit tests. This means that the integration tests that I'm going to show you later in the demo, they will be running on mocks and not on the actual running instances of AEM. Why I decided for this approach? Mostly because I saw that similar things work well in other frameworks, and most popular framework today in Java is Spring. And if you work with Spring, you probably saw how they write their integration tests. So there is a class mocked MVC, which does something very, very similar that I'm going to show you today how to do with AEM Mocks. Okay, one other specific thing to AEM is what you shouldn't be testing. So during my time working with AEM, I saw on a couple of projects a lot of what I think is useless testing. And I'll give you two examples. One is testing a utility class. So a utility class is definitely something that you shouldn't be specifically testing because it needs to be tested through some of the requirements. Or testing, for example, a data class, for example, or a Sling model that contains no business logic, just injects the data from the JCR. So this is something, again, that AEM developers should be testing if Sling models work okay, or actually Sling developers. And it shouldn't be us while we implement our business logic. So what I would recommend to do in a typical AEM project is to write integration tests for Sling models, REST services, and servlets, and of course maybe a couple of others, but these are the most common ones. And why Sling models, REST services, and servlets? Because if you remember the first three basic guidelines, we want to focus our testing on the things that we expose to the outside. So the Sling models expose data to HTML, which ends up on the screen of our users, and REST services and servlets also expose data to the outside. It can be used by, I don't know, our own JavaScript. It can be used by mobile application or any third-party service. So these are the three core classes where I see integration testing can be very useful, and I would definitely recommend writing integration test for those. And I'll show you later in the demo how this looks like. And I will do it right now. So I hope that you can see my Chrome. I have AEM 6.5 instance running, and I installed a small demo project for you where I want to show you how this integration testing approach works. And I wanted to keep this demo very, very simple, so everyone can understand and follow. So what I did is I created a demo site which basically only has a home page and three article pages, and these are all just content based on one single template. So I have basically a home page template and an article page template, and I'll show you how this article page looks like. You can, from the look of it, you can already see that I'm a backend developer and I'm not a front-end developer, so there's no CSS here. It's just for demo purposes, and I just use a couple of core components to demonstrate this. So I have a title, I have text, and I have an image component here. So that's all. And then if we jump to the home page, you will see what I did on the home page is I created one component that I believe mostly anyone working with as an AEM developer did something similar in their career. And that is a component that's called article list, which is just reading all the child pages, and then it's creating a thumbnail and a link and a abbreviated text to link to the actual child pages or the articles. So that is mostly everything. And now I will jump into my IntelliJ, and I want to share with you the code of how this component is implemented, and then most importantly how this component is tested. So I'm switching to IntelliJ now, and I'm sharing the article list HTML file, so which is the script that renders this article list component. And there's nothing special here. We just loop through the list of articles, and for each of those we display an image, URL, title, and description. And we use the article list model. And I will show you now briefly how the article list model is implemented. It's a simple Sling model. What it does, it just lists the children, and out of those resources, it creates article items. And for every article, what we want to do, we want to grab the first image, and we want to grab the abbreviated text, and we want to create a link for it. So these three things I've implemented in OSGI services. You can see that we have three custom OSGI services referenced here. Why I did this is because I like to separate business logic in services, because I just think it makes the whole code base more nicer, readable, and of course these services are easily reusable if I would need them anywhere else in the future. So let's take a look at these services that are very, very simple. So we have this get text accept service, which just what it does, it finds the first text component on the page, it gets the text, and then it just abbreviates the text. So very, very simple. I have another service which is called image finder service. So what it does, it finds the first image component of the article, and then it grabs the thumbnail rendition of that image. And lastly, we have the link service implementation, which uses the externalizer out of the box service to generate the external link. And that's it. We have one more class that we use here. Just for the sake of the demo, I created a utils class, which just returns the main content children from the main parsers. And that's basically everything. And what you can see here is that implementation of this component actually uses a Sling model, but it also uses 3 OSGI services, and it also uses one util class. So if I would like to cover all this code with unit tests, I would need at least 4 classes. So one for the Sling model and 3 for these services. Instead, I'm going to show you a bit of a different approach using integration testing. So as you can see in my test module, I only have one test, and I am testing the Sling model class. And why Sling model? Because Sling model is the only out of these classes that I've shown you that are actually exposed outside. Everything else, all the OSGI services, these are my internal implementation details, and this is something that I'm not writing a specific test for, but I'm going to test them through this integration test anyway. So let's explain how these tests are set up. First of all, we use AEM Mocks context here, and of course, before running the test, we need to make sure that all of the services get registered within the context. So the first thing I do is I register all the AEM out-of-the-box services that I need to use for my test. And you can notice here that I'm always using the mock implementation of the services, because I don't want to test AEM. So I just want to use mock implementation of the out-of-the-box services. I need the AEM object injector, so I need to register that service as well, because I'm using it here. And then after that, what I need to do is register my custom implementation services. So contrary to the AEM services where I use the mock implementations, here in my custom services, I will use the real implementation. And this is because I actually want to test this code, because this is my implementation. And through testing of the model, I also want to get these services tested out as well. And lastly, I will just load some data in the form of JSON. So I have some pages to test on. So I loaded the home page, the climbing, and the surfing article. And what I did here is I just wrote one test. So one single test to test this functionality. And this test is testing that if we have 2 articles present in the content under the home page, when the article list component model is adapted from the home page, the model should return 2 articles, and the article should have the corresponding title, description, URL, and image. And these are actually the things that I'm checking with these assertions here. So we are checking if that we get 2 articles. We are checking that the titles are right, descriptions are right, and the images, in the right rendition, and all of that. So just one single test to test all of these classes. I will just run this test now so that you actually see that it works. And what you can note here, it doesn't take a lot of time at all. It's around 250 milliseconds. That is because mostly everything is mocked except our implementation classes. So I will come back to IntelliJ now, to Chrome, sorry, because I just want to show you one last thing. So in my sample project, I added Jacoco plugin. And I want to show you what code coverage you can achieve with only one integration test like this. And in my example, I have, you can see in total, 95% code coverage on the services implementation, models package, and the utils package is completely tested. So if you want to check what's not covered, for example, let's check the model. Then you will see that the only thing we haven't covered here is this catch that just logs any exceptions that might happen in the post construct, which is not something we want to test anyway. So I would say that I'm very, very happy with this 95% of code coverage that I achieved for this component with just one single integration test. Okay, so I'm coming back to the slides now. And before I end, I want to share some key takeaways from this lecture. Some of the best practices that I would like to share with you is that for sure invest the time needed to describe the test. So not only implement the test, but try to invest also a significant amount of time to describe what you are testing. So I use the given when then syntax. I use the out of the box JUnit 5 annotation, but if you want to use something else, that's completely up to you. What's important is that every developer can easily understand what requirement you are actually testing. Also, I would recommend to write your business logic in services. This, just makes life easier also for other developers, and it makes easier for you to create mocks because every service has an interface, and then it's really simple to mock OSGI services based on their interfaces. The last best practice I would like to mention here is to separate the mocked classes from the test classes. If we come back to the example that I showed you, you might have noticed that in my test, I don't have any mocks here. So there is no, when, then, return, and stuff like that. Because if you write your mocks inside your test, then you kind of pollute the test, and it's much more harder to understand what the test is really about. So instead of doing that here, what I recommend is separate mocks in a separate package, like I did here with the externalizer. So what I did is I mocked the AEM class externalizer using its interface. I didn't mock everything. I just mocked the method that I need, and that way I completely separated my mocks. So from the actual test, which I believe makes the tests themselves a lot more easier to understand. Some things to remember that we discussed in this session is to actually test the logic that you write, not the framework you are using, not any libraries you are using. Those developers that are developing those libraries should be writing tests for them. It shouldn't be us. Second thing, only test the things that you expose, your public APIs. Sometimes you will need to test maybe something more, but in general, this should be the guideline, because you don't want to really test all the internal implementations you do. I mean, you can, that's a different approach, but if you do that, basically you will have two different implementations that you need to maintain. And last thing I want to mention here is that if you are new to testing, if you haven't done this before, or you haven't done it with AEM, it's going to take some time to get up to speed. So you need to make sure that you have actually time to write all the tests that you need, and you need to plan this time in advance. So you need to talk to your Scrum Master, project owner, or whatever, and make sure that you actually plan the time in your sprints to do this if this is something that's new to you. And I know maybe some developers will now say, yeah, we are trying to do this, but there is this, manager that's, won't give us time to do this. So that's the reason why I would like to end this presentation with one quote, and it's a quote by Uncle Bob from the Clean Code book, where he said that managers do defend the schedule and requirements with passion, and that's fine because that's their job. But our job as developers is to defend the code quality with equal passion. With that, I would just like to share you the references on the GitHub project that I just demoed here. And I would like to encourage everyone, if you liked this session, that you also read an article that has been written by a colleague of mine, Matija Kovaček, because we tested this approach on a project together, and he wrote a great article on a very similar topic. It's called Test Behavior, Not Implementation. So that's all from me today. If you have any questions, I believe we have another minute or two. But I love discussing these topics, and if you want to discuss it some more, feel free to drop me an email or add me on LinkedIn. And that would be all from me today. Thanks very much, and let's check if we have some questions. Okay, so we have a question, anonymous question. What is the recommended approach to test event-based behavior? For this, I would still recommend probably to go with a unit test. I mean, it really depends. It really depends on the use case. But as I said, we have this quite mature set of tools. We have JUnit, we have Mockito, we have AEM Mocks, and you can use these tools to write both an integration test and a unit test. And it really depends on your requirement. It also depends on how you implement a specific feature. So all these things depend on how you're going to test it. And I'm pretty sure there are some cases where you can go with a unit test, you can go with an integration test, or you can go with a combination of both of them. Okay, then we have another question. Oh, okay, this is a very, very, very good question. Also an anonymous one. When do you start writing tests? Do we do it before, after, or somewhere in the middle of writing code? I would say I saw all of these different scenarios, and you know that TDD teaches us to write tests first, but I don't think it needs to be so strict. I think if you are if you get familiar with how to write tests and how to write good tests, and if you are developing something that you are sure you know how to test afterwards, it's also fine to write the test after. And for me, it's also fine to write the test somewhere in the middle while you write your code. I think that really depends on your development style. I'm fine with all of the approaches as long as the test gets written. So what's very important is that on once you do a review, that you make sure that there is a test. I think that's the most important thing. Okay, next question we have is, did I ever use mutation testing frameworks to improve the quality of tests? No, this is something that I haven't used yet. I saw that it's possible with JUnit 5 to use mutation testing. I think it's a really, really cool feature, but to be honest, I haven't yet had a use case for that. So in AEM, but yeah, maybe, why not? Another question, it's all well and good to test the behavior, but contracts for SGS services tend to break on dependency injection, or you need to depend on incomplete mocks. How do you test those? So basically what I tend to do is when I need some kind of a service from AEM, first of all, I check if there is already an available mock. So I would check it in AEM mocks, in Sling mocks. And usually, with every version, they keep on adding more and more of these mock classes. And I think the support is quite good already. Of course, there will be some cases when you are missing a mock and you need to mock it yourself. And I think that's absolutely fine. Or even if you don't like the implementation of a specific mock, you can write your own mock version of it, which is okay in my opinion. Or you can even post a pull request to maybe improve some of the mock implementations of Sling. Okay, we are a bit overdue, but I will try to answer some of the questions that we still have left. So next question is, do you have some suggestion or automation to test component dialogues in edit mode in AEM? Well, in this session, we focused on testing the backend functionality and testing the stuff that we expose from the backend to the outside. So pretty much to HTL and to other services or other teams that might be using our services. When it comes to testing dialogues in AEM, you would need to write UI tests. And of course, I fully support writing UI tests. I believe that every project should have UI, ideally a UI automation engineer as part of the team, and it's possible to write tests to test dialogues in edit mode with tools like Selenium, and there's a couple of new ones, but that's not really a topic I can deep dive into. Okay, and one more. So the last question is, I made a gigantic test with every assertion. It makes harder to understand where the error is. Shouldn't we use granular test descriptor so that the test name gives away what the error is? Do you see any advantage in a test for all assertions? Yeah, I guess that's just two different ways of how you can write a test. I would say for a use case that is as simple as this that I showed you, I wouldn't spend time definitely on writing different tests where I test this and test that, because the test that I've written is so simple and it's well described that I think anyone can easily understand what's going on. And for me, the most important thing is if I have a requirement that's not working, that the test fails. And once the test fails, I will start up my local instance and then I will do debugging locally, and I can easily figure out which of the assertions is actually not working. But if you have a more complicated scenario, then I would say yes, definitely. Then you would make sense to write more text and have them more granular. Okay, thanks for a lot of questions. I hope you like the sessions, and feel free to get in touch with me after the session as well. Bye bye.